So let's jump straight into our pop culture leader, I suppose you could say. And let's talk about Chris Rock. Yes, Chris Rock launched his comedy special today, or on the weekend, and it was on Netflix, and it was his first. This was his first special since the infamous slap. And I think it's really interesting of how he actually, because I mean, this is kind of, he never really spoke out about what happened on that night pretty much a year ago. Obviously, he's been interviewed about and everything like that, but he's never really actually stood up and had his say. This was his say. Dr. Rod, have you had a chance to watch the special yet?
I did watch it, yes, and
Oh,
it was
great.
a first for Netflix as well as a first for Chris Rock himself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, first for them going live, right? Them actually going live
That's
with
right,
something,
yes. Yeah.
which was great, and I love it how they're all trying to overcome the challenges and try to keep pushing trends and trying to create new things. Which I actually think that comedy is actually this place where there's a lot of innovation. That's probably the right word. There's a lot of innovation with how they're doing it, because which is great. But what did you think about how Chris Rock fought back against the slap, or let's say slapped back?
Well, of course, he used comedy and it generated a few laughs. I wasn't all that impressed by the language he used. Some of the references
Yes.
he made to Will Smith I thought were disrespectful. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, we've really gotten used to that in our culture, particularly in comedy. Most comedians use quite strong language that most of us who are Christians would actually object to. So I found the general attitude quite objectionable. And I don't know how serious he was. It's hard to know. Look, some of the commentaries that I've read around it suggest that he was very, very serious, and he was taking this opportunity, as you said, to slap back. But it is a long time since the incident. He chose not to press any charges, and I think he could have. And of course, the Academy really validated Will Smith's behaviour, because they went ahead and he still got his gong, and really nothing much was said about it. Although I do note that Will Smith himself has apologised. He's apologised publicly. Of course, it's always really difficult to tell how sincere an apology is these days.
Mm-hmm.
I can certainly understand why Chris Rock chose this particular performance to make a public statement. And as a comedian, of course, in it being a public performance and a live performance at that, he chose humour as his vehicle. But the underlying message was very, very clear. This was his opportunity for revenge, and he took it.
Yeah, I think that's the right. I think that's the key that I took away from this. Now, yes, obviously, as faith-based, as Christians, as faith-based leadership development coaches, and as a pastor, let's say we're not advocating for you to go and watch this special. It's not like, go and watch this special. This is because there was some questionable things in there, questionable language. His views on things aren't very conservative on some things, and definitely not. I wouldn't say he carries Christian values. However, we can learn from all people on how to be better leaders. And I think the main thing that I took away from this, as far as, because we will have people attack us, right? We will, as leaders, whether it be online, where they troll us, whether it's someone in the workplace, that's verbally abusing us, or even just gossiping, or doing whatever, attacking us. Or it might actually be someone that actually physically attacks us. And I think it's very interesting how he responded was, I feel, how we as leaders should fight back. And it kind of goes back to last week when we were talking about making sure that we have a voice in the town square, right? That we were discussing. You brought up last week, Dr. Rod, that when we are, like, we need to have a voice. We can't just cower away and just allow things to happen to us. We have to have a voice. However, we emphasized last week is we must know how God has called us to respond and when to respond. And I think this is kind of like the living example of what we were kind of talking about last week, of like, we need to know how God has called us to respond. How has God gifted Chris Rock? Comedy. He's funny. Like, that's just, that's what he does. And so he used his gift to be able to stand up for himself. Also, the timing, right? Like, when to respond. This is a year after this thing happened, and you might think, why did it take so long? Well, practically, to develop a special, which he was in the middle of developing, and I hear other comedians talking about that, when that all happened, he was still in the comedy clubs, kind of working through his act and trying to develop it. It actually takes comedians a long time to really develop a proper hour, right? So not only was he developing his stuff, he now had to fit in this new thing and try to find how the best way to kind of fit it into his routine, as well as he needed to make sure that he was responding properly to this thing, in that it wasn't coming emotionally, right? I actually kind of feel like we as humans and leaders, we can react with emotion without wisdom, right? So I thought it was smart that he took the time and didn't respond straight away when he was emotional. He obviously worked through it. It then became a bit, and he was able to respond in his way, comedically, that he knows how to emphasize, and also at the right time. It had all, like, but the heat of the moment had gone, everything like that. And I think that that's something that we can learn as leaders is, well, what is your gift? How do you fight back? What's God gifted you to do? Sometimes in business, so as business leaders, maybe our way God's gifted us to fight back is just to be successful, right? To just make a lot of money and then, give to a cause that'll really make an impact, and that's you fighting back or whatever. And so that's, Dr. Rod, how would you say you would respond in that situation, considering you would make sure you responded in the way that you've been gifted to respond, and at the time?
So I don't think I would have it in me to respond in that particular way. Look, I wouldn't have pressed charges. I don't think that was something that I would do or even necessarily recommend, but I think I'd call out the behaviour at the time. There's nothing like the instant to respond. But look, Chris Rock used his talent, his niche, if you like. I'm just a little bit concerned that there might have been an element of revenge in it, and I'm more for forgiveness rather than revenge. That would be my only point. But I agree with you that we should put it into the context of how God has called us and what assignment we have. And in some cases, it may be wiser just to let it go through to the keeper. But the tension we have as Christians is, on the one hand, we want to turn the other cheek, but on the other hand, of course, as the wall builders in Nehemiah's time discovered, sometimes you've got to strap on your sword and you've got to protect your territory. So, we've got to really use a lot of wisdom here, I think. And look, I'm not overly critical of what Chris Rock did, but it's probably not what I would do. And if someone came in and asked me for advice, I'd probably not say to go down that route. But you know, these are the sorts of circumstances in which there's really not necessarily any strict prescription, and we must use godly wisdom in terms of how we respond. And by the way, I do agree with you that we do have a right to respond. We have a place in the public square, and particularly when we have a significant public profile, then I think we should use the right to speak in the public square.
I actually find that interesting that you mentioned that there was, what was the word that you used? There was animosity? No, what was the word that you used?
I talked about an element of revenge.
Revenge, yes, yeah. Which you're spot on there. That there definitely, I definitely don't feel like there has been any forgiveness. Like there may be, but you could sense from the way that he was delivering it that it didn't seem like there had been any form of forgiveness, right? And maybe it was just his act. Maybe it was just, it was the part of the show, because like I said, he's obviously worked through all of the emotions and stuff like that, and now it's just a performance. And so maybe he had just mastered it in a way that he got the best laughs out of it, and kind of like that was it. Maybe, who knows? We don't know. But I think that's kind of key, that we need, when fighting, we need to make sure that we're not taking revenge. We need to make sure that we are still pursuing, like you said with Nehemiah, we're still pursuing our mission, hand on our sword and on the wall, like hand on our purpose and fighting as well, defending ourselves. But we've got to remember that God said, vengeance is mine. Like, he's the one that'll take revenge. And I talk about David and the example that he had when he cut off Saul's tassel, or the hem of his garment, and he just turns around to Saul and he says, well, let God judge between you and I who's right and who's wrong, right? Like, leave that up to God. I think that's kind of like an attitude we need to take as leaders, that when someone attacks us, we need to have that perspective, that because you rightly said that there was definitely a tone of, this is my way of getting back to you. I'm going to defame your name. You hurt my brand. I'm going to hurt your brand. That being said, a lot of the stuff he said was quite true, and had like, there was definitely a large element of truth to what he said. However, yes, it did come from a place of revenge rather than a place of forgiveness that was talking about a situation. I know that as leaders, when we get attacked, we're doing a lot of Bible references, even just in this first thing, because I'm about to say that our fight is not against flesh and blood. The Bible clearly states that sometimes, like the old saying, hurt people, right? And that's actually very, very true in this case of Will Smith. We all know the public, embarrassment he's suffering, and that you see the mental decline he's gone through, and everything like that leading up to this, right? That he's a hurt person, and that's all he did. He was a hurt person that then hurt someone else, right? And so we need to have a little bit of empathy for people. If you're a leader and someone has attacked you or is attacking you, forgiveness. as Dr. Rod said, forgiveness is the key. And actually, like in our program, the second week we talk about forgiveness and go spend, I think there's like 8 or 9 lessons that we talk about. No, that's the other week. Look, one of the weeks. There's a bunch of lessons in that, just talking about forgiveness and what we actually need to do around forgiveness as leaders. Because if we're carrying unforgiveness, we can't be leading people effectively. So that's my encouragement to you. If someone slaps you physically or metaphorically, make sure you know how God has called you to respond, the purpose, the gifting, the platform that He's given you, and the timing. Make sure you're not responding out of emotion. Make sure that you're responding out of forgiveness as well, and make sure you go through that process of forgiveness, so it's not revenge, but forgiveness. Hey, you just watched an excerpt from our On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you'd like to see the full episodes, check out our YouTube channel and consider subscribing.